So just a really quick agenda to kind of take you through what we'll be looking at today. A couple of key things. So this is a high-level technical SEO tutorial, I guess. Now, really important to understand that we've got a whole range of people in this webinar. A few of you will be marketers, others will be web developers, and some of you may not have any involvement with websites or digital, and maybe just here out of pure curiosity, which is great. So we're going to try and keep it relatively high level for a subject that is quite technical, and I guess can be a bit complex. We're going to kind of try and keep it as simple as possible, I guess. So yeah. All right, so some housekeeping for today. This Zoom recording will be available after the session. You'll be able to view the recording and kind of look back. So don't worry about kind of taking notes and all that sort of stuff. It'll all be available to you after this. We've got a couple of tools that we make reference to, particularly links. They'll all be available to you within the recording as well. So you'll just use the same link that you came through in today, and you should be able to get the video. We're going to run a series of polls throughout the presentation. I'm going to encourage you to participate in those. They are anonymous, so yeah, just kind of get involved. And we're going to ask a series of questions. It'll be interesting to see some of the answers. And we do have a Q&A section available, so feel free to ask any questions along the way. I'm going to try and pause in between each slide and have a look and see if there are any open questions and answer those where I can. We won't be able to get through every question, just depends how active everyone is. It just depends on how much time we have. We're going to try and stick to 2 hours today. Might go a little bit less, hopefully not much more than 2 hours, but we're going to try and obviously stick to the time frame. Gary's also in as a panelist today, so he'll help coordinate some questions. Obviously, if we don't get to your questions, we can always you can always reach out to us afterwards, or if you're a client, obviously please get in contact with your client manager. They'll be obviously very happy to help. Okay, quickly, just about me, very quickly. So I'm Peter, obviously. Everyone likes to call me Dimo. That's my nickname. I've inherited it since high school, so I've stuck with it. I've been doing digital marketing for 18 years now. I originally was a web developer, building websites and writing software applications. Quickly kind of realized that was not what I wanted to do, and got into digital advertising. I come from a larger agency, a company called Columbus, which was part of Aegis Dentsu, working on some really big brands there, Woolworths and David Jones. And I'd say in recent times, I've become very fascinated with data, particularly using my programming skills to kind of do a lot of data science around machine learning and artificial intelligence and that sort of stuff. So that's a very high level of who I am. We've also, I'm also going to introduce Gary. I'll let Gary introduce himself actually.
Hi, I'd assume most of you know who I am, the Managing Director of Indago Digital. I'm just going to be acting as a panelist here. Peter will be doing the presentation, managing the Q&A section. Now, can you, are all of you able to ask questions? Can somebody just please see if that Q&A section is working by maybe just posing a quick pointless question? Perfect. Everyone, testing, working, you're absolute legends. Appreciate it. What Peter will do is ask questions. I'm very well, thank you, Jeff. Just ask questions as you go along. Yes, Joe, you are all on mute by default. Just ask questions as you go along, and Peter will try and get them as we go through. And most of you will have our details anyway, so you can always email some questions through at the end. Thank you very much for attending. I'll hand back to Peter.
Thanks, Gary. Cool. So we'll get straight into it. Training. We do a lot of training. Clients in this webinar will know that we've done quite a bit of training in our day. So we train for industry bodies, ADMA, IAB. We do training for an organisation called the Australian Institute of Management. Gary's also run a couple of training courses for Google. We train for our clients in various different brands, and we've also run a couple of training days for universities. One called Digital Cadets, and we've done various bits and pieces for numerous different unis. All right, so we'll try to fly through this bit, first bit really quick. I think this is more for the benefit for anyone kind of new to SEO, and we're just going to kind of set the stage a bit here. So what is SEO and what sets it apart from traditional advertising? So if you think about traditional advertising, it normally broadcasts to a very wide, large audience. The problem with that, obviously, is that very few are receptive. Even fewer will have a current need at that given time. So you think about a TV advert, and even fewer will be challenged to be activated at that very moment. Search is obviously quite unique in the sense that we are telling search engines what we want. I'm looking for a plumber. What are the social distancing rules in New South Wales? What's the best SEO agency in Sydney? Obviously, Indago Digital. We are telling the search engines what we want, and they are giving us an answer. So it's very demand-based. So we're going to start off by running the first poll. I will set that up to run now. So 3 questions. It'd be interesting to sort of see where everyone's at with that. Do you know what percentage of your sites, what percentage of your website's traffic is SEO? Anyways, I'm sure you guys can read that. Hopefully that's running and everyone can see that on your screens. Cool. All right. I'm just going to see if I can publish these results. It doesn't look like it. So I'll just read them out. Do you know what percent of your site's traffic comes from SEO? 38% said yes, 63% said no. Definitely should probably have a look at that or ask any relevant people within your organization. And you can typically get that information from your website analytics platform. So if you're using, most people will be using Google Analytics. What is interesting is, actually we'll get to the end of this and then we'll talk about it. What percent of your website's traffic and conversions come from SEO? 36% said 0 to 20, 28% said 21 to 40%, 30% said 41 to 60%, 5% said 61 to 80, and then 2% said 81 to 100. And then what percent of your website's traffic and conversions would you like to come from SEO? Most of you said between 41% to 60%. Sorry, Peter, 41 to 80% rather.
Peter, what number would you go for? What do you think is and obviously it depends on the brands and what you're spending in other areas. What would be a go-to number? And obviously it's an approximation that you think people should be at from percentage of traffic and conversions coming from SEO.
Yeah, so we know a healthy website in terms of where traffic is generated from, you'd be aiming around about the 60% mark. Would you agree with that, Gary?
Yeah, I'd be looking for, again, it depends on the media mix, but I think anything less than 60%, and I'd say you've got some pretty large SEO issues.
Yes, correct. So I think that's a good guideline to go by. I think obviously, like Gary said, that will change depending on industry and who you are and what you're doing and how much you're spending in other areas. But if people can't find you on search, you definitely want to be looking into that and why that is. Cool. All right, so we're going to go straight into this. We're going to talk about SEO and PPC, which stands for pay per click. Most of you will obviously be familiar with Google, I'm very sure. Typical search result page here, Wedding Sydney. You will typically see the paid search traffic or the SEM traffic come through at the top. They're your adverts. People are bidding on these keywords. And then at the bottom, you will see what we call the natural results. These are the results that Google has ranked for that particular query naturally. These are the websites Google deems to be the best answer to your query. Obviously, this will change depending on your query and what you're searching. You might see things like maps. In some instances, you might not even see any paid adverts depending on the query. So we're going to run another very quick poll. So let me get that up real quickly. End that poll. So I think it's very interesting to see where people perceive people are clicking. So what percent of consumers click on the organic SEO results versus the paid search results? So where do consumers click? Paid or traffic? Or organic? What percentage? So most of you said there seems to be a split between 41% to 80% clicking on SEO results. It's really interesting to see where everyone thinks this lies, because we always tend to get a bit of mixed results with these polls when we run this. What we'll do is I'll show you some stats which will be quite interesting. So it looks like we're sitting between 61 to 80% the leader. I'll end that poll. I think it will post the results once I end them. So I'm hoping that comes through for everyone. So the answer, we ran our own test across our data sources to kind of understand where people are clicking. And our results came up about 70-30, roughly. That was a study we did back in 2018. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of data around this on the web, at least not recent data. So we have kind of pulled some stats that we've from ComScore rather to show or look at this more specifically. And what we found was it varies depending on age demographic. So your Gen Ys typically will click on SEO results, 90% SEO results. And it tends to climb as the age demographic gets older, I guess. So your Gen Xs, 70-30 split. Your baby boomers are about 50-50. which is quite interesting. I think the old timers get confused between the paid search results and the organic results. And I think the other thing that we find is that obviously the youngsters are subconsciously blocking out adverts.
But before you go into the next slide, Peter, I think the interesting thing, no matter whether you're looking at this ridiculously old data from ComScore or our more recent up-to-date data, is SEO from a search perspective still holds the lion's share of clicks. And you know, when we spoke around earlier, what percentage of traffic should come via SEO, this just kind of highlights that kind of 60% number, and then why SEO is so super important when it comes to search marketing. And I think what's even equally as interesting is that holding those top 3 positions in SEO is critical, because the lion's share of clicks go to those kind of top 3 positions. So yeah, just what we're trying to highlight here is how important SEO is.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. I'm going to run a video very quickly. Hopefully everyone, we did test this earlier, so should be able to hear what's going on. This is quite a dated video by Google, just sort of highlighting how search engines work. I still think it's probably one of the better videos out there that kind of gives a very quick overview of how Google works. So I'm just going to run it real quick, and I'm just going to set up a bit of the introductory into the tech stuff that we're going to talk about. So here we go.
Hi, my name is Matt Cutts. I'm an engineer in the quality group at Google, and I'd like to talk today about what happens when you do a web search. The first thing to understand is that when you do a Google search, you aren't actually searching the web. You're searching Google's.
And I apologize, I pressed the button and I shouldn't have. I'm so sorry.
And I'd like to talk today about what happens when you do a web search. The first thing to understand is that when you do a Google search, you aren't actually searching the web. You're searching Google's index of the web, or at least as much of it as we can find. We do this with software programs called spiders. Spiders start by fetching a few web pages. Then they follow the links on those pages and fetch the pages they point to, and follow all the links on those pages and fetch the pages they link to, and so on, until we've indexed a pretty big chunk of the web. Many billions of pages stored across thousands of machines. Now, suppose I want to know how fast a cheetah can run. I type in my search, say cheetah running speed, and hit return. Our software searches our index to find every page that includes those search terms. In this case, there are hundreds of thousands of possible results. How does Google decide which few documents I really want? By asking questions, more than 200 of them, like, how many times does this page contain your keywords? Do the words appear in the title, in the URL, directly adjacent? Does the page include synonyms for those words? Is this page from a quality website, or is it low quality, even spammy? What is this page's page rank? That's a formula invented by our founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, that rates a web page's importance by looking at how many outside links point to it and how important those links are. Finally, we combine all those factors together to produce each page's overall score and send you back your search results about half a second after you submit your search. At Google, we take our commitment to delivering useful and impartial search results very seriously. We don't ever accept payment to add a site to our index, update it more often, or improve its ranking. Let's take a look at my search results. Each entry includes a title, a URL, and a snippet of text to help me decide whether this page is what I'm looking for. I also see links to similar pages, Google's most recent stored version of that page, and related searches that I might want to try next. And sometimes, along the right and at the top, I'll see ads. We take our advertising business very seriously as well, both our commitment to deliver the best possible audience for advertisers and to strive to only show ads that you really want to see. We're very careful to distinguish your ads from regular search results. And we won't show you any ads at all if we can't find any that we think will help you find the information you're looking for, which in this case, the cheetah's top running speed is more than 60 miles an hour. Thanks for watching. I hope this made Google a little bit more understandable.
Cool. So, like I said, a bit of a dated video, but I think it's probably the quickest way to kind of get that information across. So the main thing to understand here is that Google is completely automated when it comes to the organic results. It is a computer or a bot crawling your website, following links, then going to those pages, crawling those, then following those links, and it's just this continuous cycle. You think about how many billion, if not trillion pages it needs to kind of traverse through every day to kind of see updated information. It's really quite remarkable in terms of the technology. But there is no human element to it, which is kind of what we're going to talk about today around how do we understand what Google can see, how do we pinpoint any issues, what do we do when we see issues, because there's really no one we can talk to when it comes to directly with Google. We have to communicate with Google through a tool called Google Search Console. And there's some of the things that we're going to kind of try and go through today and demystify a bit. Just going to quickly check if we've got any questions come through yet. No, we're all good. So Google's obviously evolved over time. It's changed quite a bit, and predominantly all Google's trying to do in terms of its updates is trying to improve the quality of the results. So as time has gone on, Google's rolled out a series of algorithm updates, and it continues to do so till this day. Some of the key algorithm updates, oh, I'm so sorry, I've clicked on some stuff and I shouldn't have again. So some of the key algorithm updates that I'm going to kind of point out here are one called Penguin. They love to call them animal names, by the way. So Penguin was predominantly around cleaning up the results around people trying to manipulate the results around links. So for that, people buying links or trying to produce spam links to try and artificially inflate a website's popularity. Google rolled out an algorithm update to kind of fix that. Panda was another key one that happened around about 2014, which was more targeted around spammy content. So if you're trying to post thin content on your website to deceive the search engines, Google kind of put a stop to that. 2014, 15, we had the HTTP update. We're going to talk about HTTP today a little bit, but essentially Google said that they're going to give HTTPS websites a preferential vote in the search results to try and help make websites or the search results a little bit more secure, I guess. And as you can see here, this is definitely not a complete list, but we're continuously rolling out algorithm updates to kind of better the results and better the quality of the results. And obviously, the SERPs or the search engine result pages have changed over time. If you're as old as I am, you probably remember these type of results. But nowadays, it's very much changed. You don't really have text type based results. You've got things called what we call knowledge cards. So if you search for a company, you'll get a big kind of information knowledge card about that company. What social profiles are and various other kind of critical information, I guess. You've got videos that come up in the results. There's a very big one of recent times. People also asked. So you can ask Google a question. It will tell you the type of questions that people are asking in relation to that and related questions. We've been doing a lot of work in this space recently. You've got products directly in the results, stories, news, map, everyone's seen a map result, images and so forth. So the results have changed over time, and it's kind of important to understand that that will have an effect on your SEO strategy as well. So we'll talk about structured data in today's session and how we can kind of help promote some of these results to come up, some of these richer media results to come up in the SERPs for your website. Cool. So I'm going to really quickly start getting into the the technical SEO stuff. So when we talk about technical SEO, technical SEO is typically seen as the foundational element to an SEO campaign. You don't really look at doing technical SEO to improve your rankings more than just being in the rankings or being on Google. So if you think about it, you can't rank on Google if Google can't see your website or has a problem seeing your content. So typically, technical SEO is around ensuring that there are no major issues around what Google can see. And like we sort of said earlier, Google is just a bot. It's a computer program. So we need to make sure that it can see everything that you're presenting to users. And within technical SEO, you normally have these three kind of pillars or areas of observation: crawlability, indexability, and essentially performance. So crawlability is more around what Google can see. Indexability is, okay, well, Google has seen it, but has it kind of accepted it? Has it put it into its index? Has it stored it? What might be stopping it from that happening? And then performance and accessibility is around, well, are we delivering a good experience to the user? Is the website fast? Is it accessible? Google does not want to show a result that is not going to essentially help the user because your website's too slow, or there's elements on your website that are affecting how that content can be consumed, or putting hurdles there. Let's check if we've got any questions. No, we're good. So making changes to your website. Most of you will be running off of a CMS. WordPress is probably one of the more common ones. I put this slide in just to kind of make it very obvious and give you a bit of a guidance in terms of, what do you do if you want to make changes to your website? If you're working within a large organization, there will typically be an IT team, or if you're lucky enough, an internal web developer that you can go off and have a chat to, present some of these findings that we're going to kind of walk through today. But typically you want to find out, who controls the website, what's the process for getting changes actioned, and as well as that, you would normally want to share whatever findings you kind of unearth with those people, so they can very well understand what you're trying to do. Most web developers will be very familiar with the tools, the processes, and the issues that I'll probably put up today. And a lot of what today is about is just identifying potential issues that you can kind of share with relevant people to kind of initiate a conversation and get something happening, and ensure that the website is, or your website is, not sort of hitting any technical hurdles. I'm going to showcase a few Chrome extensions throughout this presentation. So this is the first one, Wappalyzer, I believe it's pronounced. So the links here, you can just search for it on the Google Chrome store. Essentially what this Chrome extension will do, it will give you a list of technologies that is kind of running on your website, or even any website for that matter. So if you want to know what kind of CMS you're using, is it WordPress, is it Joomla, are you on Shopify, are you on Wix or something like that, this tool will kind of show you what they're running, and alongside various other bits and pieces in terms of what type of tracking software you might be using, like Google Analytics or JavaScript frameworks. That starts to get a little bit more technical, but what's your website got under the hood? And it's a really easy way of kind of just identifying that. So I encourage you to install that Chrome extension, and it will definitely save you a bit of time.
Sorry, Peter. When you're looking to develop a new website, maybe it's you're working for a large corporate, maybe you got a bit of a side project on. Are there certain things you need to be looking for when picking a CMS? Do certain CMSs have more SEO restrictions than others? Can you give any advice?
Yeah, I think obviously the more mainstream CMSs will have SEO elements already kind of embedded in them. So, you know, something like WordPress, which is probably 80% of the web these days, will have SEO covered. I think the main thing is to be asking those questions. You know, is SEO covered? What SEO features are available within the CMS? The only other thing I will probably say to that, Gary, as well, is when we start talking about speed and performance, CMSs can have a big impact. The CMS that you choose can have a big impact on, you know, what your, you know, how your website's going to perform. So I'd be asking those questions up front.
I think it's a really important thing. I think if you're looking to move CMS and SEO as a focus, I think it's definitely worth getting an agency involved in that point to understand how that CMS will negatively or positively affect your potential SEO rankings. A very important question before you pick a CMS, to my mind.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the other thing that you'd probably want to be doing is just do a quick Google search, obviously. So if you're on some bespoke CMS or some sort of more corporate type CMS, just do the CMS name and SEO issues, and typically things will, you know, you'll probably get a bit more of an understanding of kind of the hurdles that you might be facing there. Cool. Just real quickly. All right, so we're going to get into it now. Let me just make sure I've got everything open here. Where are we? All right, so very quickly, I'm not gonna take you through HTML. I'd be way too technical for this meeting. And the main thing I wanted to introduce here is that websites run off HTML. This is essentially the code, or more commonly referred to as the markup that that the browsers read in order to present the pages that you look at, essentially. So it's very important to understand that that's what actually happens. I'm going to show you how to get to the HTML and look at it. And all HTML is a series of tags. I'm hoping you can see my cursor wrapped around with content, and they just nest within one another. And it's really important to just kind of know that this is how it works, I guess. And I'm going to show you a couple of important SEO tags which you can search for and see, you know, where they are and what content's within them. But we're not going to go into too much detail with this because it is, you know, be getting quite technical. The other thing that you can do is you can use the Chrome. So most of you will be on Chrome, and I suggest that if you're doing this, you do use Chrome. The Chrome Inspector tool, which I'll showcase how to do in a second. This is what we call the Chrome Developer tab. I'll show you how to open that up in a second. You can use this little icon here to hover over elements on a page and then see the respective HTML that controls that element. Just going to really quickly demo that. So hopefully you can still see my screen. Okay, cool. So the way I like to bring this up is I just normally do inspect, right click, sorry, and inspect. You get the Chrome Developer tab here. And you'll see this icon here. So I want to see, let's say, for example, I want to see the HTML for this digital marketing agency on the Indago website. I just click on the inspector tool and I can highlight over it, click on it, and then we'll highlight the code. And here I can see that this is a H1 tag. And then that's the HTML. And then there's the content within it, digital marketing agency. And just for a bit of extra kind of nice too, I guess, you can actually change this, and we'll change it on the website. Obviously it won't be live. You can see I've just made an edit on the website, but as soon as I refresh, it'll just obviously go back to what it was. It doesn't save it, if you will. But I'm going to show you, again, another plugin that will help you get all this information without having to go through this process. But for those of you that want to kind of geek it out a little bit or already understand the inner workings of this stuff, I've kind of given you a bit of a tip on how to do that. The other way you can get to the HTML is just to basically, on a web page, go up to view, view developer, and then go view source. And that'll open up all the HTML. Obviously, this is not going to make sense to a lot of people except for web developers, but that's how you kind of get to it. So we're going to take you through a couple of important tags for SEO, show you how to get to them, how do you, what do they mean, and then we're going to kind of go into a few tools. So probably the most important HTML tag for SEO will be your title tag. So your title tag essentially is what is shown up within, most of the time, within the search results, within the SEO results. And typically we'll have keywords in it, read nicely and be kind of click friendly. You'll also come up, the content within this tag will also come up in the window or the tab within Chrome as well. That's what it's kind of intended for. So you can see here, and I'm not going to do this for all the tags, just to kind of very quickly reaffirm what I showed you. I can do a Control F on the inspector, and I can look for the title tag, and you can see that it highlights where I've typed in title, it's highlighted where it's found it, and you can see that it's digital marketing agency. And you can see that that's in the Chrome tab there. And if I was to search for Indago Digital, that would be the actual, well, you can see it in this screenshot here, the actual title that will come up. Now, we're not going to talk about how to optimize the content within these. That's more for the content seminar that we're going to be putting on after this one. But it's just more important to understand what it is, where to find it, and where to find the information within it, I guess. Very similar to the title tag, we also have the meta description tag. That one actually does not show up anywhere on the website. It will predominantly only be used for the search engines, and it will yield this piece of text underneath the title. And again, you typically would want to optimize these for SEO to be more click friendly, trying to entice the click through, that sort of thing, keywords, that sort of thing as well. But again, that's the tag that controls it. You can do a search for it in the HTML and see that see the content within there. I showed you how to do an inspect, but you can inspect elements. And another very important tag is what we call heading tags. They normally go from H1s all the way to H5. A good SEO practice is to have at least, a single H1 tag on every page of your website or any page that you want to rank. You can clearly see the keyword that we're going after on the Indago Digital website, digital marketing agency, and that is a H1 tag. So if you use that inspector tool that I showed you earlier, hover over that piece of text, that will be wrapped around a H1 tag. And typically will be one of the more prominent pieces of text on the page, and will be big. So yeah. Cool. Another important tag is the canonical tag. We'll talk about URLs and how this relates to the canonical tag. So in this example here, I've got one URL, but what have I got? 6 different versions of the same URL. And URLs are messy by nature. You'll see here I've got the technical SEO page. I've got a HTTPS version, a HTTPS version with a www, a HTTP version with a www, and so forth. Then I've got the whole thing repeated again without the / on the end. So to Google, essentially it will come across as 8 different pages. We normally don't want that. We only want Google to see one version of this page, right? The canonical tag helps solve that issue. It's a tag that will be on a page, and it will state the URL we want to be canonicalized. So the canonical version of this page. So if Google was to come to, for example, the HTTP version, non-www version of this page, it would see this tag and be like, oh, okay, there's a duplicate version of this URL, and it lives here, and it will discard this one, or it might not discard it, might put it into its kind of knowledge bank, but like we understand that these pages are essentially the same. The thing that Google doesn't like is duplicate content. It definitely has gotten better over time in terms of naturally understanding that, but you would, you know, the advice that I'm going to give clients is that you just don't want it to leave it to chance or for Google to guess. These tags have been put in place so that you can specifically tell Google, you know, what you want to happen rather than let it kind of decide. Because as smart as Google is, and it is very smart, it does get it wrong. It does get it wrong quite often. So where you can explicitly state your intentions, you should do that. Now, a lot of CMSs will likely put this thing in, put this canonical tag in for you automatically. But again, you need to have a look and see what's actually happening. Have a look at a few of your pages and see what's actually going on there. Robots.txt, very important element. So the robots.txt essentially is the first thing that the crawler or the bot will look at before it tries to crawl the website. The thing you have to understand with robots.txt is almost just like a rule book for the crawler, or any crawler for that matter, to understand what are the rules of crawling your website. Where can I go? And where can't I go? And any reputable search engine will follow these rules. So a couple of the key things are about the robots.txt. It always lives on your domain /robots.txt. That is a standard URL for it. It should never change. You can target various different bots. So I can say, well, Google, I want you to do this, but Bing, I want you to do that. Very rarely would you do that, by the way. That doesn't really, there are kind of some applicable scenarios, but more of a technical thing. But generally, you would just, you know, it'll be one rule set for everyone. When you open up this, and you can probably do this while I'm talking, just go to your website, put /robots.txt, and you should get to it. If you don't see something come up there, then I suggest you've got a problem and you need to kind of investigate a bit further. But asterisks or stars in the robots.txt act as a catch-all. If you see disallow : star, that essentially tells search engines you are not allowed to touch my website. You are not allowed to crawl my website. And in turn, you will not appear in the search results. So if you do see that and you're not coming up in the results, that's very likely the reason why. And we do, you know, this is a very common thing that happens, and it normally happens when you're launching a new website. Your new website is in staging or in development mode, accessed on a different URL, and the web developers put this disallow all to kind of stop the search engines from going to that staging site. But when you launch, it carries over. And now all of a sudden on your live site, you've told Google, well, you know, I don't want you to touch my website. So in turn, it just doesn't rank your website at all. The good thing is you can test your rules through the Google Search Console tool, which we're going to be talking about quite extensively in a moment. So there's a test tool in there, which I'll show you, which you can basically put a URL in. It will validate against your robots.txt. I'm going to very quickly just go to our one. I'm Indago Digital.
Peter, just before you do that, there's just a question around canonicalizing between different domains. I don't know if you want to quickly answer that, if that's okay.
canonicalizing across different domains. So yeah, there are some scenarios where you might need to do that. Obviously, if you've got your website accessible on multiple domains, there are scenarios where that happens, but very rare. You would typically want to just say, well, this is my kind of my main site, if you will, or the site I want to rank. So you would canonicalize between that domain, the duplicate domain to the domain that you want to rank on Google. That's very rare. Doesn't normally happen. The only other kind of more valid reason why you'd be doing that is more when you're doing things around globalizing your website. So doing something like you've got an AU version of your website and an NZ version of your website. And there are some kind of best practices there, but they're kind of like the two main areas. Unless
I think whoever's asked this question, I mean, maybe send me an email, because I think you've got different issues, to be honest with you. I think you're almost looking for a different answer. Almost looks like you're talking more about a redirect strategy. But if you want to ping me at the end of this, and I can respond to that after the meeting.
So yeah, sorry, just going back to that. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. That's the robots.txt for Indago Digital. You can see here what we've done is we have said user agent all. We've put in a whole bunch of statements in here, and we basically said, well, these pages, we don't want you to crawl them. They're standard WordPress login pages. Well, we don't want Google going into the login area, and there's no value for SEO there, so we've blocked them out. We've blocked out anything that is get a quote, because, and you can see here we've put in a catch-all. So anything with about us / get a quote / anything afterwards will not be accessible to the search engines through that. And the other thing that that can happen and should happen within the robots.txt is you should state your sitemap, where your sitemap URL is. And we're going to talk about sitemaps in a bit. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, and make more sense when I get to that in a moment. Cool. All right, moving along. Actually, well, there you go. Sitemaps. I should have looked ahead. So what is an XML sitemap? So essentially, it's a file that lists every single URL or page on your website. Again, it's all about making Google's job a little bit easier and providing more information where you can. Google will look at the sitemap, and instead of having to kind of crawl your website every time it comes back, it'll look at the sitemap for hints, and it will say, okay, great. Since the last time I looked at this sitemap, 4 pages have been added. I'm going to go look at those 4 pages. Last time I looked at the sitemap, these many pages have been updated. So it will go back to those pages and update its index of those pages, or the information it knows about those pages. And essentially what it does, it improves the crawl efficiency. There are other kind of meta kind of data that you can provide within the search, within the sitemap. So things like how frequently, so they're called attributes rather, how frequently those that page or the corresponding URL changes. So if it's if it's a search result page that you want indexed and it changes daily, you'd want to have a daily flag on that. It will, like I mentioned, note when the last time that page was modified. And you can also provide a priority flag. So you can say, okay, well, this page is of a higher priority than another page. Google will add some sort of priority to its kind of crawling of those URLs. Also important to understand that most people will have a just a standard sitemap for web pages, but you can actually have separate or individual sitemaps for images, videos or news-related content. And unless you're kind of a news publisher, you wouldn't really be looking at that. But if you produce your own images or have copyright images, you typically want to be looking at an image sitemap, and likewise for videos. Couple of best practices or guidelines. So we talked about canonical URLs. You'd always want to be providing the canonical URLs in your sitemap. Sitemaps can be posted anywhere. So if you remember the robots.txt, it was very explicit, robots.txt, it always has to be that name. Sitemaps can be named anything, be on any URL within your domain. So they can be quite hard to find at times if you're not familiar with your own website or kind of have access to your back end. You can link them up and should link them up within Google Search Console, which we'll talk about in a second. I'll take you through Google Search Console, and they can be stated within your robots.txt, which I showed you just earlier. For very large websites, you would break them up past 50,000. So if you're I don't know, if you're an eBay or a massive retailer, you've got more than 50,000 pages, you need to break those up. You can't have more than 50,000. And typically, actually no, they should always be integrated within the CMS. This is the biggest problem we find with client websites. There is a sitemap, it's been statically generated, but it doesn't update as the website updates. So if you run off a CMS, any CMS will have the option to add a page. So if I add a page, the sitemap should update dynamically. If I modify a page, the sitemap should update dynamically and post when that change happened within the sitemap. So then when Google comes back, it knows that it needs to recall that URL. So that's normally a feature within the CMS. And you'd want to be looking at making sure that your sitemap is always 100% up to date. I'm going to show you how to look at that within Google Search Console in a second as well. HTTPS. So everyone will kind of know what this is. It's basically the secure version of your of a URL. Nowadays, most sites are or have HTTPS, but you can normally access the site on both HTTP or HTTPS. I think in a couple of years' time, I think HTTP will essentially just become obsolete. You know, you won't be able to use it anymore. But for the time being, you want to make sure that your website is HTTPS. Your canonical URLs are pointing to it. Google back in, going back a while now, 2014, actually announced that they're not going to, not that they're not going to show HTTP versions, but they're going to demote HTTP versions, and they want to be showing users the secure version of a URL. But I think probably the biggest thing to be aware of is that if Google does index the non-secure version of your website, it will show within the search results that this page is not secure. And that's going to have a massive impact on your traffic, because obviously people don't want to click on a site that kind of says that it's not secure. I believe Chrome as well will just notify you and say, hey, do you really want to do this? So the two key things here that you want to make sure you've got a HTTPS website. Just do that by trying to access that URL, the HTTPS version of whatever URL on your website you're looking at. And you want to make sure that Google has indexed your HTTPS version. And you do that via the canonical tags that I showed you earlier. And another method as well that I'll show you in a second, which is redirecting HTTP versions to your HTTPS version. So again, another plugin that I want to make sure that everyone, and to be honest, there's quite a few of these, so it's more of a preference thing. You know, if you just search SEO Chrome plugins, you'll find the whole stack of these. But I like to use this one, SEO Meta in one click. Just do a search, and there's a link here for it. All these things that I spoke about, title tag, description tag, heading tags, canonical tags, and a whole lot more, you can just basically get that information through a Chrome plugin, rather than having to sift through the HTML, which can be quite tedious for most people, I'm sure. I'll show you how that works real quickly. So I've got it installed here. I'm just going to refresh Indago Digital. That's this icon in here. That's the Chrome extension that I've installed. I'll click on it and it'll give me all the information. I can see the title tag, the character count, descriptions. No one uses keywords anymore for meta keywords. The canonical tag, I can see that there is a canonical tag on this page, and it is set to the HTTPS version, non-WW, and various other tags in here as well. You can also see that how many heading tags there are. You can see on this page there is one H1 tag, which is the one that I showed you earlier, 9 H2s, and so forth. And yeah, feel free to explore through this. There's a lot of information, but more specifically to headers, you can see how the headers are structured in this instance. So it can be quite a helpful plugin. How are we going for questions, Gary?
Yeah, I've been answering a few. I don't know if you can see the Q&As. I think there's one which was, what if you update a page and not create a new one? How do you let Google know? Which I believe you'll cover during the demo of Google Search Console.
Sorry, say that again, Gary. How do you...
One of the questions is, what if you update a page, you're not creating a new one? How do you let Google know? But I thought you'd probably
yes.
tell people when you do Google Search Console.
Yeah, so that's in the sitemap, and there's an attribute in there that it says when that page was last modified. That date needs to update to the day you modified it. Then Google will be able to look at that date and say, okay, well, my version of the page is outdated, and I need to update my version. There's also another method that you can use in more of a manual sense within Search Console, which I'll cover in a second, actually. Cool. Can you repeat the name of the Chrome plugin? It's called SEO Meta in one click. That's the title of that. Redirects. So what is a redirect? Essentially, a redirect is when I try to access a URL and I'm automatically taken to another URL. So I'm going from URL A to URL B, sort of automatically. They're very important to understand how redirects work from an SEO perspective, because Google handles redirects differently depending on how they're implemented. And there's a whole kind of series of best practice around redirects, which I'll try and cover now. So when will you use a redirect? I guess most cases is when a page URL changes. So I used to have my product on a URL, and for whatever reason that URL has changed. I now want to make sure anyone going to that old URL that they're redirected to the new URL. So that's a use case. A lot of people use them in vanity URLs. So I don't know if you want a very short version of your URL and you want it to be redirected to the longer version, you can implement a vanity URL that basically just takes you from the short version to the long version. Probably more common use cases are when you're doing a site migration. So you've changed your website completely and the new website's got new URLs and all the pages live at new locations. You would want to make sure that those pages are redirected. And another use case is enforcing canonical URLs. So we talked about the canonical tag in the sense that, well, we've got multiple versions of a URL. What you can actually do is you can enforce the canonical version through redirects. So if I've got my technical SEO URL If I try to access it on a HTTP version, it will automatically redirect me to the HTTPS version of that URL. And that's what they call enforcing canonical URLs. I can't physically get to a non-canonical version of that URL because I get redirected to the proper one. And that's something that is really good to do when you can, and we advise to do, because it just cleans things up and it minimizes any potential issues with duplicate URLs. So the thing to understand as well with redirects is there are redirects that search engines can see, and then there are redirects that search engines cannot see. So 9 out of 10 times you'll be using a 301 redirect, and that signals to Google that that page has permanently moved to a new location. In the instance where it's a temporary redirect, so you intend on kind of bringing the old URL back, you'd use a 302 redirect. They are redirects that search engines can see. Redirects that search engines can't see are meta redirects or JavaScript redirects. You want to avoid these. And what you want to avoid as well is multiple hops. So Google, I think, has stated that they won't follow more than 5 hops or chains. So going from one URL, then going to another URL, then going to another URL, and then eventually ending up in the final location. You want to avoid that. And of course, there is a plugin to see what redirect method is being used. So whenever you see, whenever you want to see if a redirect, what implementation is being used, use this plugin. It's called Redirect Path. Go to the URL. It will redirect you obviously to the new location, and it will tell you the method that is being used.
Peter, there's a question in the question box. I don't know if you want to read that and answer that.
Can you? Sorry, we'll do it live. Okay, cool. I'm not sure if everyone can see that, but can you clear your redirects of old URLs after a certain period of time? Yes, you can. That's a catch-all actually, because it depends on why you've redirected in the first place. If it's a site migration and there are links going to those old URLs, you typically want to keep those redirects live for ever if you can. And what I mean by links is other websites pointing to those old URLs. You want to make sure that you preserve the value of those URLs, moving them to the new location, or else Google won't kind of pass on that value, if that makes sense. So any instances where you're trying to, you've built up equity on a page, whether it be by the quality of the content or links pointing to that page, or URL rather, you'd redirect it to the new location, but you'd want to make sure that that redirect stays live as long as possible, because it'll ensure that the value continues to flow through. Hopefully that answers that question. Cool. All right, we'll move on. I think not doing the best with time, so I'll try and speed it up a little bit. Hopefully everyone's still with me. Search Console. So we're going to run another quick poll. Do you have it? Have you heard of it? Do you have it? And when was the last time you looked at it? So let's launch that poll real quickly. That's interesting to see what people come back with. Okay, great. Give it one more sec. Okay, great. All right, I'm going to end that. We'll post the results. Have you heard of it? 80% said yes. That's great. That is fantastic. It's good that people know what that is. Very important tool. We're going to go through in a second. Do you have it? 60% said yes. I'd say if you don't have it and you want to get serious about SEO, you need it. So I'm going to show you how to get that set up. It's very easy. And when was the last time you looked at it? 42% said never. And again, if you want to get serious about SEO, want to get in the results, you need to be looking at what's going on in this tool. And you don't need to be a search marketer to kind of get value out of it. Sometimes it's just good to know your way around Search Console so that, again, you can kind of be aware of any potential issues and ask relevant questions where you need to kind of make sure that things are happening. All right, so we'll get into it. All right, so the first thing is what is Google Search Console, or GSC for short. So basically, it's a free tool by Google that helps you monitor and maintain or troubleshoot any potential issues. It's basically your lens to Google search, what Google sees from your website, and the way Google communicates to website owners on what it sees. So you can monitor what URLs Google crawls and indexes. You can be notified and fix potential issues or errors. You can update your content, so you can submit updated content through there. And you can monitor your organic performance. It's probably one of the, I guess, most SEO data can be a bit sketchy at times, but probably one of the most accurate way of looking at your search rankings or SEO rankings within Google Search. So you can do that through Google Search Console. Just real quickly, sorry. Okay, cool. Verification. So if you want to, if you don't have Google Search Console, obviously, first things first, you should probably check with your website, website master, IT team, whoever's controlling your website. Hey, do I have Google Search Console? If so, how do I get access to it? Most people can just link, if you've got a Google account, can just link you into it. If you use Google Analytics, same sort of thing. You can just be linked into Google Analytics at a certain privilege level, and you can get visibility. If you don't have Search Console, you need to verify your site with Google. To do that, you'll need a Google account. You'll need some sort of admin or some sort of access to your website, because you need to essentially have some sort of control with your website so that you can add things onto it, so that Google can verify that you are the website owner to be able to be looking at that data. There's a whole stack of verification methods that you can go through. So more common ones are things like uploading a HTML file to your domain. Basically, it's just a HTML file with a bunch of random numbers in it. You pop it on your website, and if Google can get to it, it says, great, you're validated. Same sort of thing with a HTML tag. The most preferred way, and probably the most recommended way, will be to do it through a DNS or domain level, which will basically validate every version of your website. And again, versions are things like subdomains, www, non-www, HTTP, HTTPS. Google sees these things, sees these URLs or versions as different websites. So when you do it on a DNS level, you get access to all of them all in one hit. So that's probably my preferred way of doing it. But to do that, you need access to your domain. And then if you've got Google Analytics set up already, you've got access to that, you're the owner and all that, you can typically do it through Google Analytics or Tag Manager, relatively easy as well. Yeah, like I said, you can be linked into existing accounts. So if you've got, that's already been set up, just ask whoever controls it to link you into your Google account, and then just go to Google Search Console. It should appear in there. You can provide users with admin or user access. Admin just means I can change settings, and I can actually do some damage. So obviously only give people access that need to have access to that, and users more of a, I can view things but can't change anything. And again, like I said, Google treats the URLs differently, so non-www versus www. And if you set it up for the first time, it can take a few days for Google to populate what's going on in there. So don't just think, you've got it and then, no, there's nothing going on in there. Come back and have a look at it in a few days, because Google takes its time with populating that data. Like I said, there's kind of, you can verify on a domain level or a URL level. I would opt for the domain level because you get access to all versions of it, and you save yourself a lot of time. Cool. We're going to do a live demo, and I'm actually going to take you through this live because it was quite difficult to put a lot of slides around this. And I think there's more benefit with me just sort of going through this live and talking through the various different reports. So we'll do that now. So for the purpose of this, we're going to go through the Indago website, Indago's account. Obviously, we're happy to share this data. This is Google Search Console. This is your interface. I'll really quickly talk about the interface. So you've got your user settings up here. So if you want to add users, you can do that. You've got notifications. So any new notifications will appear in here, and there'll be an icon to say you've got X amount of new notifications. You want to make sure you got this hooked up to an email that you're monitoring, and not going, notifications aren't going into spam, because you'll be surprised how often people have had issues for months on end, and they're just not aware because they're not getting the email or not notified to it. Your reports are here on the left-hand side. You've got broken it up into index, which is essentially just what Google sees in its index or in its database, if you will, of pages on your website. Enhancements are things like, what things can you do to enhance your SEO. And then security and manual actions we'll talk about. Legacy tools, so Google Search Console recently went through a massive revamp and they updated this, and a lot of the tools have not been migrated. So you need to go through to the old version of Google Search Console to get access to some of these tools. And I won't go through all of them, but I'll showcase a few of them just so you can understand what's going on. And you've got information about the links that point into your website and your settings. That's where you can add users and set up your website. Cool. So I'm not going to talk about performance too much because this will come in a later date in terms of a seminar. So more about monitoring the performance of your website on organic search. So you've got things in here like the total number of clicks, impressions, your CTR, what positions you can get your queries, like what people are searching, how they're clicking on it, that sort of thing. Again, I'm not going to talk about this in a lot of detail because this section of Google Search Console could probably warrant another hour in terms of going into it massive detail. The URL inspection tool is probably one of the more important aspects. So what you can do here is you can inspect the URL. So put a URL in this case, I've just put in Indago Digital homepage, and it will give me information about that URL. So it'll tell me things like, okay, great. This URL is on Google. It is submitted and indexed. I can get more information here. It's in the sitemap. It was last crawled on that date. It was crawled as a Googlebot smartphone. So Google now crawls using a mobile crawler nowadays. We'll talk about mobile first indexing in a second, but back in the day it used to be desktop. Now it's moved to mobile, and various other information that you can get about that URL. I can request that it be re-indexed. So basically I want Google to come back and re-look at it because it's changed, or I want some sort of update to happen there. and I can view the crawled page. So essentially, when I view the crawled page, this is now looking at the URL through the eyes of Google, not the browser. What does Google see? So we can look at the HTML, which can be a bit, obviously, if you're not a web developer, you don't really understand what's going on there. But I can do a screenshot. I'm not going to do this now because it takes about a minute to run, but I can do a test, a live URL. And basically what that does is it sends Google to that URL, and it will do a screenshot of what your website looks to Google, rendered version. And then if you sort of pick up on some issues there, or it's not looking right, or this, it's not kind of looking the way it's meant to look, then you've got kind of something to go by and sort of say, okay, well, what's going on here? You've got a bit of a something to show your web developer to sort of say, can we look at this in more detail? So that's the live inspection tool. Probably the most important report from a technical SEO perspective is your coverage report. So any issues that Google comes up with will come up in here. There's 4 main areas: errors, valid with warning. So it's saying these are URLs with errors. These are URLs that are valid. So we found them, but they have warnings. And warning to Google just means, well, we're not quite sure. We need you to have a bit of a look deeper into this and tell us what's going on. Valid is there's no problem with these URLs. And excluded is we found these URLs, but for any given reason, we've excluded them from our index. And it's very valid for websites to exclude URLs. Like I said, you've got multiple versions of URLs, and that's a valid reason. But you'd want to be monitoring this number and get a kind of understanding why they've been excluded. Because the last thing you want is to exclude a URL that you want in the index. So errors are probably the main area, like probably the most important area that you want to be looking at. The errors will be listed in here. So depending on what's going on with your website will depend on how many errors will come up in here. So here we can see we've got 1 active error. The error is the URL has been submitted to Google, probably through the sitemap, but it's blocked in the robots.txt. So Google's sort of saying, well, what's going on there? Why would you submit a URL to me when you've also asked me to block it in the robots.txt? So you click on that. I can get the URL. We can say it's get a quote. We probably need to look at that and understand why that's happening. We'll update our robots.txt. You can also see the history of these validation checks. So we can see that this issue has been going on. I think Google looks back 90 days, so has been happening for the past 90 days. Whereas with this issue, submitted URL not found, we can see that was an issue. You can see through this little spy chart here that was an issue, but it was fixed. So Google came back and saw, okay, that issue is now gone. Same sort of story for valid with warnings. So, so this is sort of saying that we found the URL, it's in our index, but now it's blocked in the robots.txt. So all the robots.txt does is essentially says, Google, you're not allowed to go there. But if for whatever reason Google had gotten there before you put that rule in there, well, Google's now got a version of that page in its index. So it's sort of saying, well, what do you want us to do with that URL? Do you want us to drop it? Do you want us to keep it? That sort of thing. Valid. The way I like to look at valid and excluded is you generally want to make sure that any sudden spikes in this number you're aware of. So what's an example of that? Say, for example, I'm looking at this and one day I come in and sort of say, okay, I went from 214 to 1,000 overnight, and I know I don't have 1,000 pages on my website. Well, then you need to start asking some questions. Why could that be? What are the potential issues going on there? They break them down by submitted and indexed here, so you can see that. And same sort of story for excluded. So if you've got a very kind of static number and this jumps up or goes down very kind of sporadically, you'd want to be asking why that's happened. But here you can get all the reasons and URLs that have been excluded. So, 770 have been excluded because there are pages that go through a redirect and you can't actually access them. Blocked by robots.txt, 494, and so forth. And depending on what's going on with your website will depend how many kind of checks happen in here, I guess. I'm just going to really quickly see if there are any questions going on. How are we doing for time, Gary?
Yeah, I think we're doing okay, actually. I think if you could finish the Google Search Console in the next kind of 10, 15 minutes, that would work.
Cool. All right, we'll move on. Sitemaps. This is where you submit your sitemaps to Google, and it will tell you if there are any issues with those sitemaps. So we've got a few sitemaps submitted here. I'll go to this one. I can see in this one, these are the page sitemap, I believe. Actually, sorry, this is a sitemap within a sitemap, rather. So within this sitemap, the pages sitemap, there are 57 URLs. There are no issues. It was last read on that date. If there are any issues with the sitemap, they will come up in this section here. You generally just want to make sure that you keep on top of this. You can see here for us, we've been a bit lazy. These are older sitemaps that we need to take out, we need to remove. None of them are posting in here, so I couldn't get to those URLs. Removals. This is actually it's been updated recently. Normally, you have one option. Now you can remove based on various different rationale reasons. So you can remove URLs temporarily. So you can say, well, this is more, again, because Google's a search engine, it's crawling the web. Removing a URL doesn't necessarily mean that it will stay out forever. So if something's coming up in the search results that you don't want it to be, you can, obviously your first protocol is to block it, and so that through your robots or through a tag to say, hey Google, I don't want you indexing this page. But that's not going to necessarily remove it from the search engine instantly. You can come in here and post that URL, and that will temporarily remove it. But then if you've done your work right and you've blocked Google from going back to that page, then it shouldn't come back, if that makes sense. You've got outdated content. This is very similar to reindexing it through the first tool, the URL inspection tool I showed you earlier. This is more around, this content is being outdated. I want you to come back and recall and update your search, your index. Safe search is, more around sensitive data. If you want to get personal information out, and there's various other kind of criteria for that. You can have a read using the question box here. So there's a what when you use that. But that's your removal tool. You ever need to get a URL out of Google for whatever reason, this is your first kind of point of call. So that's your index area. I'm going to go into enhancement. So Google recently launched this Core Web Vitals report. They've split it between mobile and desktop. You can see here there's not a lot of information for mobile at the moment on this account, but we'll go into the desktop account. This is very similar to, works the same way that coverage does, but this will pick up on URLs that either are delivering a poor user experience or need some sort of attention or improvement. So in this instance, it's CLS is a page speed thing. It's sort of saying there are 13 URLs here that you probably should look at in terms of improving the experience of. And you can kind of see the history of that. And then good is more around, these pages are serving an exceptional experience. We're actually in the process of relooking at our page speed at the moment on Indago Digital. So we're looking to kind of do a lot of work in this space. Our site's often been looked at as sort of the same way as a mechanic's car. We never really touch it, but we're touching other people. So yeah, we're looking to do some work on that. We're going to talk about mobile in a second because mobile is very important for SEO. But this is where you can look at any mobile usability issues. Again, this will just note any URLs that are being flagged to have mobile usability issues. So things like elements being too closed, or the site's not responsive, that sort of thing, they'll come up in here. Or you'll get a list of URLs that have been deemed as mobile friendly, which is obviously very important to monitor. Now, the remaining, these remaining three are very on a case-by-case basis. They will only come up in Search Console if you have what we call structured data implemented, which we'll talk about in a second. Hopefully we've got enough time. Got a whole section on structured data, but these structured data is essentially information you can pass to Google about the type of content on pages. And these will come up in here when or if you've implemented that on your website. So you can get more information about those particular structured data types. So again, same sort of deal. You can look at errors, pages with errors for that structured data, and so forth. And we'll be covering that in a second. Manual actions. This is if Google, if you've been naughty and Google's, you haven't been following the Google guidelines, Google might, post a manual action, which essentially means you've been reprimanded, if you will, and we'll kind of say, you're not following the guidelines, and you need to change something. Not a very common thing these days, but if you're purposely trying to deceive Google in terms of links or content, you may get a notification here, and if you do, I suggest you get in contact with an SEO agency straight away to kind of figure out what's going on there.
Peter?
Yep.
I might just kind of push you on to continue on with the presentations, because I know there's a couple of other things that we need to get through, like mobile accessibility and specifically Lighthouse. So if you want to move on, that'd be awesome.
No worries. Okay, cool. So that's Search Console. The rest of this stuff is fairly self-explanatory. So I'll move on, to make sure we get through the other sections. But yeah, if you've got any questions, obviously reach out to us. Mobile friendly. So we're going to run another poll. Let me get that going. Mobile traffic. Launch poll. Do you know what percent of your site traffic comes from mobile devices? And what percent of your site's traffic is from a mobile device? Cool. Looks like we got most people voted there. So 75% said yes. You do know what the percentage is. That's great. Majority are saying that 41 to 60% is mobile. So I'll share those results. So yes, obviously mobile has become increasingly more important. I think when I started doing SEO, it was majority desktop traffic coming through. I think nowadays, if I don't see an even split between mobile and desktop, I would probably be saying there's a problem. And then in most cases, mobile does definitely beat desktop, which is obviously very important in terms of how search engines have evolved. And obviously how you look at your website. Most of us will be auditing and looking at a website on a computer, but as I'm going to kind of show you in a second, Google is now looking at websites more from a mobile perspective rather than from more of a traditional desktop. We'll kick on here. So mobile first indexing. So 2016 was the year when Google sort of said, well, we've kind of realized what's going on here. And we're going to change the way we're looking at websites. And we're going to start looking at your website from a mobile version, and essentially start notifying everyone within Google Search Console to say, hey, and the rollout is actually still happening. I think they're looking to complete it by September this year. But they started saying how we flipped your primary crawler to mobile rather than the traditional desktop. And if you see a fluctuation in the results, it's probably got something to do with that. So that notification will come up in Google Search Console. And generally in the top right-hand corner, you will get an understanding as to what crawler is being used from Google's end. Most of you will understand the concept of responsive website. Essentially, it's just the modern day way of websites being built today. So they're generally built responsive, which basically means you've kind of got websites that are built more in this block level sort of fashion, and these blocks kind of collapse into each other as the device becomes bigger or smaller. So all the content is generally still there, but where the content lines up kind of changes or responds to the browser width, if that makes sense. The best way, so just on that one, the best way to kind of understand that is just get your website on a browser window and just change the width of the browser. If you can see here, I can see that this is responsive. It's now changed. Cool. So as I kind of showed you just earlier, there's a report in Google Search Console that will give you a lot of this data, a lot of these insights. But if you want to understand if a page is mobile friendly, kind of that instant, or even if it's not a page that you have access to through Google Search Console, or maybe you're looking at a competitor's website or someone else's website, you can do it through the Google Mobile Friendly tool. Just Google that, or there's a link here, and you'll get to this tool, and that essentially, will run an audit on the page. Very important to understand that it's just the page, not the website. So you generally want to do this on a few pages to make sure you're not running into any specific content issues. And it will give you a signal. It will say, yes, this page is mobile friendly. If there are any issues, it will flag them in here and generally give you a bit of a steer as to where those issues are. Some of the more common things we look at are things like elements are too close to each other and not very mobile friendly, or it's not rendering right on a mobile device. If that makes sense. So just chuck the URL up here, run the test, and you'll get to this page, and that's how you kind of run that. Lighthouse. So we've always kind of known it as SEOs that Google's kind of trying to find automated ways of understanding page experience or user experience. At the end of the day, Google's just all about kind of trying to provide the best experience to its users, and that's why we use Google when it comes down to just in terms of the quality of the search results. But not just that, the websites that it's presenting, what's the reward websites that are providing a good user experience. As part of that, major part of that really, and we kind of saw this come into 2018, that was predominantly around Google page speed, website page speed, load times. So a faster website generally will yield a better user experience. And more recently, Google kind of announced or hinted that accessibility is part of one of their core ranking factors, and they're looking at that quite heavily in terms of understanding if your website is providing a good user experience. The best way to audit user experience, at least from a kind of what Google is potentially seeing, is a tool called Lighthouse. Lighthouse, again, is an open source tool. It's free. It is a page experience auditor. It'll look at things, well, essentially it runs five different tests. Performance, which is speed, accessibility, website best practices, SEO, and progressive web apps. I think because we're running a bit low on time, I'll try and skip progressive web apps because it's quite a big topic. Try and look at these areas here real quickly. How do you do it? So I showed you how to do the Chrome dev tools. So you open that up, and now in the latest version of Chrome, you'll see a tab called Lighthouse. You go to that and you run it through there. I'll do a quick live demo in a second. You'll generate a report. A couple of tips that you would need to understand about Lighthouse is you generally want to run it in incognito mode, you don't know what incognito mode is I'll show you how to get to that in a second. But essentially, it's just an anonymous way of browsing. And that will just ensure that no other kind of plugins or other elements on your browser will be affecting the numbers in these reports. You always want to make sure throttling is set. That basically just ensures that you get more normalized numbers. There are different reports for mobile and desktop, like most things with Google these days. Don't worry about CLI so much, but you can run Lighthouse in a command line, and generally the results in there can be a little bit more kind of consistent or better. And the audits are on a page level, not website. So you are auditing a page. So I will just very quickly demo that. So we'll go to the Indago website. You'll do an inspect to bring up the Chrome DevTools. You'll see the Lighthouse tab there. Oh, I'm sorry, I've made a mistake. You need to go to File and open up Incognito, a new window, Incognito. You'll then go to the page you want to audit. You can right-click, go inspect, or you can go to View Developer Developer Tools. That brings up the developer tools. We're on Lighthouse already. You want to make sure that you've got clear storage set, simulated throttling sets, and all these options in terms of the reports you want to run and the device that you want to run it on. So we'll run it on mobile, we'll generate the report. Takes a second. Do a whole series of tests. You can see it's kind of emulating a mobile device here. And it will come back with the results. Oh, didn't do it in this instance. All right, it normally comes back with the results. I won't kind of do that again just for time. It'll normally come back with the results, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, cool. So the first and probably more important one is performance. Again, all these results come back with a score, and scores from 0 to 100. 100 obviously being the best and 0 being non-existent. So again, I'm going to try and get through this relatively quickly, but essentially what the performance tab is doing is it's auditing how quick your website loads, but it's more from a user experience perspective rather than from point A to point B. So it's more about the feeling or the perception of speed rather than the actual speed, if that makes sense. And Google's changed the way it looks at it because it kind of says, I don't really care, you know, what's going on in the background. All I care about is delivering content to the user and how quickly is that content getting to the user. So it uses these new kind of metrics or more user-based metrics around how fast that content is getting to the user. So metrics like first contentful paint basically means how quickly did I show something to the user. You know, time to interactive. How quickly was the website or the page interactive, usable, basically, and so forth and so forth. So I could spend quite a bit of time going through this, but for time, I think I will skip through it. It will give you a progressive way of looking at how your page loaded. So rather than, typically don't want a website that is just blank, blank, blank and just kind of loads instantly, because there are websites that take forever to load. You typically want a progressive load. So you want, the background or an image to load, the title, and then it kind of progressively comes in. That gives the user confidence that something's happening and that, the page is loading. And then it will give you a series of recommendations on what you can do to improve the speed. So
I think, sorry to interrupt you, Peter, there's a couple of things here. I think firstly, this almost relates back to the point around the CMS that you pick, because sometimes actually CMSs will restrict what you can actually do from a performance perspective. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
And I think there was a question that someone kind of retracted, but I think this probably deserves to be answered. I think I'll have a look at the Q&A and just give your opinion around utilizing Lighthouse versus another tool. Is it this perception of speed thing, or would you use multiple tools? How do you see the difference between Lighthouse and something like GT Metrics?
Yeah, look, GT metrics still very valid. I still use it. You will get a lot of the similar metrics through GT metrics in Lighthouse as well, but typically GT metrics will be measuring from point A to point B, whereas the Lighthouse tool does a very good way of auditing kind of that more perception. Does it feel fast rather than kind of like what's loading in the background, if that makes sense. So my answer to that would be to use both. Anything you can do around site speed is going to be advantageous, both not just for SEO, just to your users in general. So yeah, hopefully that answers that. Was that it, Gary?
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right, cool. Cool. All right, we'll move on to the next one. So accessibility. This will check for common issues around accessibility, and are there any kind of impeding factors around that, I guess. So you'll get you'll get a score out of 100. You typically want to make sure that you can get to 100 or as close to as possible. It will give you recommendations as to what's going wrong. So things like, buttons don't have an accessible name. So if you've just got a button without a name on it, well, that's not great. What does that button do? Things like, images don't have an alt tag. An alt tag is basically used for hearing visually impaired. So you can basically read out what the image is, and actually used for SEO as well to kind of help with image search. So things like that. Probably one of the more common ones is, well, I've got white text on a white background. It's not very usable. So they're kind of common checks. The thing with accessibility is that there's only so much Google can do with this from an auditing tool. Generally, you'd want to be doing your own kind of visual assessment, making sure that things appear as accessible as possible.
Or just before you roll on, Peter, I think also Google released a core algorithm update a couple of months ago, which is focused on accessibility. Obviously, when you're looking at SEO, really, Google are always trying to provide the best user experience to their customers, which means that we need to have the best websites, and accessibility is one of those things that's becoming, more and more important. So I think, as well as looking at speed, this accessibility framework also needs to be, studied quite heavily.
100%, yeah. Website best practices. So these are general checks that every website should be doing just as a best practice. Google will give you an audit on that. So, a very common one will be, are you using HTTPS, which we spoke about earlier? If not, it'll come up in here. Other things will be like, well, you're using JavaScript frameworks that are known to be vulnerable to security attacks. You need to be having a look at that. So yeah, or even just images around inappropriate sizing, that sort of thing. The SEO check here is quite limited in my mind, but it will audit just best practice things like, hey, do you have a title tag? Is it too long? That sort of thing. So if you're scoring quite lowly there, you generally want to be looking at that, because that's a very basic check, and you should probably be, in the 90s, if not 100 for that, if you're taking SEO seriously. And then progressive web apps, or PWOs, that's a typo, is essentially a check to see if your website is within this kind of technology framework of a progressive web app. Very hard for me to go into this in a lot of detail without spending a lot of time, but essentially, this is a newish type of way of delivering web apps via the web, making your website more of an app, an accessible more like an app. So there's a lot of talk around this at the moment, whether or not this will take over native apps. A lot of the bigger players are starting to get on board. So a lot of the gambling companies are doing this at the moment. So I believe William Hill's doing something like this at the moment. It's a relatively new technology, but essentially just kind of ensures that you're adhering to more of the website modern day best practices. And if you need to or want to understand more about that, I think I put some links in here. I was hoping we'd have a bit more time to kind of talk through this, but I don't think we will. So the things around PWA are things like PWA will have will allow your website to be installable both on a mobile or a desktop. Will be accessible offline, and again, just more making your website more like behave more like an app, and generally will be essentially a replacement for a native app if you're kind of going down the PWA route. I've got an example of a more, whenever you look up PWAs at the moment, they seem to be giving you this game, this fidget spinner example. You can see here on a mobile device that I've actually gone to fidgetspin.xyz.com or whatever, and I can play the game, but at some point, my browser will say, hey, do you want to add this to your home screen? It will then add it like an app would on your home screen on Android or iOS now. So Apple is supporting this. And then when I access this, doesn't matter if I have internet or not or what's going on, it acts like an app. I can get back to this and play this game again. So websites are starting to employ this. So if you've got some sort of loyalty program or login, or your website kind of does more than just being a website, generally, you'll see this sort of behavior. Yeah,
I might get you to move on because I think it's important that we touch on schema. So I might just get you to kind of move on to that and just finish with some schema, if that's okay, or structured data.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks. Yeah, we've got 10 minutes, so we should be able to get through it. So we talked about structured data in terms of it coming up in the Search Console, the individual reports. This is where we're going to talk about it in a little bit more detail. I think this is a very important area to be looking at. Definitely should be trying to incorporate structured data wherever possible. It's definitely worth looking into. So what is it? Essentially, it's data that you can provide or put on your website that search engines like Google will look at to understand your specific types of content a little bit better. So in a little bit more context, here is an example. If you remember, search results are changing. No longer do we just have the text and the meta description. We can enhance the results with additional things. So this is an example of a search box. I've searched for Rotten Tomatoes, they've come up, and I can actually search in the search result. And this has been made possible by adding that code onto the website. Another example is breadcrumbs. So you can see here, instead of having a URL in the search result, I've got the breadcrumbs. I'm on jamieoliver.com, and I can actually look at where this page sits on their websites within recipes, categories, ingredients. But I can also click through to recipes and categories directly through the search results. So again, I'm enhancing the search results with additional information. Some of the more kind of visually prominent examples are things like ratings. So, Budget Direct, they've got 23,000 reviews. They're rated at 4.5. The stars come up. That can come through on the search results in certain scenarios, depending on how you've implemented your structured data. Probably seen these as well. FAQs. So a lot of if you search for a company name within their search results, you can have FAQs come up in the search results underneath your listing. Everyone's probably searched a recipe at some point. These are, you've probably seen these if you have. So these are the rich results for recipes. So look at this. So, instead of just having a text-based result, we've got an image, we've got ratings, and then actually this is probably not the best example. Nowadays, you've got things like, the amount of servings that recipe will yield, prep time, cook time, all that sort of stuff. So additional information you can put in there. So why is this important? I think it's quite obvious. More information, the better. Richer media, you can understand that. You can obviously understand that if I was presented with these two results, I'm more naturally likely to click on the one that has more media or more information. Got information about calories here, cook time, got some ratings, and more importantly, I've got an image. This will yield a better click-through rate, the CTR, which in turn will result in higher rankings. If Google's presenting these two results and this one's getting clicked on all the time and this one's not, Google's naturally going to push this one down. So wherever you can implement these, the advice is obviously to do so. There are a whole stack of structured data that you can implement based on what type of content you're trying to kind of enhance. This is a pretty comprehensive list. We've got a link in here as well as to the formal Google Docs, are the ones that they support, and they're constantly adding to this. So I won't go through these in kind of specific detail, but we do have a list of ones that should be implemented more as a kind of a standard practice, which I'll go through in a sec. So yeah, sorry, standard markup. So there are structured data that you should probably, every website should have, or most likely should have. So they include things like the search box. Every website nowadays has some sort of search functionality or should have some sort of search functionality. So you'd want to implement that, that schema. Breadcrumbs. You don't actually even need to have breadcrumbs on your website to implement this. So you generally would want to make sure that that has been implemented. If you are a local business, and most people are either a local business or more fall into the category of a company, you'd want to be implementing that and making sure that you're providing as much information about your company as possible. So things like your logo, your social profiles, your address, opening times, phone numbers, that sort of stuff will help yield these type of results into Google. And then most people will have FAQs, and these should be implemented. There are guidelines that you need to follow for certain structured data, structured data types. You want to make sure that you're following those guidelines, because Google kind of works on a trust basis. If it kind of catches you intentionally doing things that you shouldn't be, it will progressively not trust you, and then that will result in your rankings going low, or the information that you're providing to Google not coming through. So you generally want to make sure that you're following these guidelines. Again, I've put a link in there to just kind of make sure. So an example there will be, I don't know, you're providing reviews, but they're not really reviews. I don't know, they're not on the page, they're not real reviews, that sort of thing. There are 3 ways you can implement structured data. Google, and probably the easiest as well, recommends doing what's called a JSON LD. And essentially this is just some JSON data that's passed through on the page within the HTML that provides that structured data. Again, I won't go into this in a lot of detail, but there are very comprehensive documents in terms of how that data needs to be referenced and what information needs to be provided per schema that you're adding in. But in most cases, if the data is available on the page, you shouldn't have any problem implementing this through a web developer or your IT team. Within Google Search Console, depending on what you've implemented, they will appear in here. And if there are any issues, they will come up in here. And the pages that kind of correspond to that Google sees has that structured data will also come up in here. So it's obviously, this is where you go to get your reports and auditing around structured data. And there's a Google tool that you can run on a page to understand, one, what structured data is there, and are there any errors with that structured data. And you can actually also, which is a newish kind of feature that they put in, you can preview what that result might look like based on the data that you've provided. I was going to do a live demo of that, but I don't think we have time for it. But It's a very simple tool. You just basically go to this URL, put the URL you want to audit in, and it will come back with the data, the structured data implemented on that URL and any potential issues. So just to summarize structured data very quickly, you want to make sure that all those kind of standard markups that I mentioned are implemented, because you can obviously see the benefit of doing that in terms of click-through rate and getting clicks through from the search results. You want to evaluate your website, and you want to kind of look at the type of content you have and look at the type of schemas that are available through Google. Kind of understand whether or not you should be implementing schemas in respect to the content that you have. So if you're a recipe site or you've got recipe pages, standard, you should have recipe schemas implemented on those pages. You want to make sure you're following the guidelines. You can test the tool through GSC. Sorry, you can monitor and perform performance via Google Search Console, but you can test specific pages using the Google tool that I just mentioned. And again, a very common mistake with this is that you want to make sure that the content within the schema that you're implementing is dynamic. So what do I mean by that? If you're regularly posting events on your website, there's an event schema that you can put in, and you don't want to be manually putting in that schema every single time you post an event. The CMS should be intelligent enough to kind of post that data onto the page, and then Google in turn reads that, and then you get the benefit of the schema. Hopefully that makes sense. And we're back on, Gary, 1:59. So I did have to rush that bit at the end, so I apologize. If any questions come up, please get in contact with your account manager, shoot us an email. We'll be more than happy to help.
Perfect, Peter. I really appreciate it. Thanks for everyone's time. Be great to get a Google review from anyone who feels that way inclined. As Peter said, get in contact with us if you've got any further questions. Tomorrow morning, we'll be sending out all the links to the upcoming events. They're going to be happening fortnightly. As Peter made reference to, the next one will be SEO content, and then we're going to move on to things like general marketing or general digital marketing anyway, paid search, display, etc. Appreciate everyone's time and have a fantastic week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers, Peter. Thanks, mate. Bye.